Hey, this is your host, Ron. I'm so glad you could join me for today's Global Vault podcast. The purpose of the podcast is to tell the story of how God is working among the peoples of our world. I look forward to spending the next half hour or so with you. Yes, welcome to the Global Vault podcast. It's great to be with you again. And we have a special guest today from the Philippines. Max Chismon is part of Simply Mobilizing, and some of us would know him through our involvement with the Kairos course. But today he's talking together with us about missional church and just trying to maybe think through what exactly does that mean, and helping us see our part as Christ followers and part of a faith community, how we too are involved in God's mission. So, Max, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you.
Let's just jump right in then and say a term that we often hear, and it's been a part of us for a decade or more, is missional church or missional networks, and it's often as an adjective put in front of some sort of ministry. But if we just think of the word or the terms as missional church, in your thinking, how would you define that? Where would you be going with the idea of missional church?
Yeah, so I agree. It's been around for quite some time, and it has had various definitions. Mm-hmm. I think from a strictly biblical perspective, and I think this could be very easily defended, I think we could say a missional church is a church that nurtures, equips, and releases God's people into mission with God. Mm-hmm. So the ministry of all believers is a fundamental New Testament teaching. And Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice. I know them. They follow me." Mm-hmm. So Jesus is the head of the church, and he is the Lord of the harvest. And after his resurrection, he never abdicated those roles. Mm-hmm. So he's even more so the head of the church. And he's also more so the Lord of the harvest. So when Jesus was with his disciples, he sent the 12 out 2 by 2. And then he sent 70 out 2 by 2. We sometimes think that a week later, he sent the 70 out 2 by 2. In actual fact, it was a year later. Mm-hmm. Now, in some of our discipleship thinking today, we would have thought that Jesus, having sent the 12 out 2 by 2, a year later, he would have got with the 12 and said, "You know, guys, I sent you out 2 by 2 a year ago. Now you're so mature. I want you to send 70 out 2 by 2. But he didn't. That was his prerogative. Mm-hmm. He's the Lord of the harvest. And so he sent them out 2 by 2. Then after his death and resurrection, we find the church at Antioch in Acts 13 gathering together, worshiping, waiting upon the Lord. And again, through the Holy Spirit, the risen Lord speaks and says, "Separate for me Barnabas and Saul for the work that I've called them." So again, he takes the initiative and sends workers into his harvest field. So when Jesus said in John 10 that his sheep know his voice, mm-hmm. and that they follow him, mm-hmm. It's important, I think, to realize that this is why Jesus died on the cross and rose again, is for this covenant relationship to be established with those made in God's likeness and image, sin being dealt away with now. And so now this relationship is established, and what God created us for in the beginning, to be laborers together with him and steward his glorious creation, he's now reestablishing that. Mm-hmm. And so that's very precious to him. Mm-hmm. And so I think missional church really should be getting its head around this idea and saying, actually, when someone comes to faith in Christ, our responsibility, in a sense, is to help grow a lamb into a sheep. I mean, the lambs don't follow the shepherd; they follow the sheep, right? Mm-hmm. but sheep follow the shepherd.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we grow lambs into sheep so that they can begin to follow the shepherd, the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the head of the church and the Lord of the harvest? So this is critical. And again, we come back to the whole idea of the ministry of all believers. So sometimes I would say to pastors, when I've got to know them a little bit and good relationship, I say, pastor, you don't really need a vision for the world. You don't need a vision for your nation, for your city. Yet all that you need a vision for is to nurture, equip, and release God's people into mission with God. Just think about that for a moment. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen to your community, to your town, the city, the nation, if that was to take place? In the world today, we have about 700 million born-again believers in 5 million local churches. If we had 5 million missional churches that were nurturing, equipping, releasing 700 million of God's people, and these churches are in every country of the world, into mission with God, well, look out, world, here we come.
Yeah. Now, as I listen to that, I think back of some parts that I've understood and seen. I understand the nurture part of discipleship and the equipping part, but I don't know if we all get to the release section. We would have churches that are equipping and doing a good job of that, and there's ongoing Bible studies of all sorts and so forth. But can you go down the track of then what? So how does a church release? Because that's the piece then of moving outside the church, engaging out here. But are there some good examples of that, or just to explain further that piece?
I think it's I put that component into a missional church because I think it's an area that we often miss out on. We do a lot of equipping in the sense of training courses and things like that, but it still often doesn't transfer over into legs and feet and moving out there into the world. So there are people that have, I think, been called whose primary role in ministry is to work in the church so that all the rest of us can do the work of the church. And that's out there on the highways and the byways as being salt and light. It's this go idea that Jesus gave with the Great Commission. And we sometimes, I think, get caught up with the event and not realizing that unless there's a process put in place, we just go from event to event to event to event. So training. So I think once a training's been done, I think we need to realize it's not complete unless we have actually helped with the process of seeing them now taking steps and seeing the word become flesh and this actually taking place. And I think if I look at Jesus, let's take two of his disciples, Peter and Matthew. So the first thing he did when he said, Peter, come and follow me, and Peter was following Jesus and ends up in his community, and he probably said to himself, I wonder if Jesus knows my house is just over there. And sure enough, he leads him to his house and basically says, Peter, throw a party and invite all your friends and all that. And he did, and so Jesus ministered to those people that were connected to Peter. In fact, it was such a great party. They broke open the roof and a real wild party that was. Then sometime later, he called Matthew and said, Matthew, come and follow me. So follow. And ended up in his community. And then Matthew would have probably said, my house is just over there. I wonder if Jesus realizes that. And sure enough, takes him right to his house and says, Matthew, throw a party. And he did. And it says in Matthew's account there that there were many tax collectors. Now, why were there many tax collectors at Matthew's party? Because Matthew was a tax collector.
His network.
Yeah, so I wonder how many fishermen were at Matthew's party. And I wonder how many tax collectors were at Peter's party. So I think where God, first of all, moves us into ministry is in areas of influence. People we're connected with. So he wants to lead us into our family, into our community, into the places we work, and begin to develop us there and use us there. For many of us, that may be our promised land of ministry. But for others, like Peter and Matthew, he later called them to go to the nations. But that's not where they started. They started in their family, in their home, in their community, and the people they worked with.
It's interesting you talk about their home, the house, the party, because it goes a little bit with the New Testament injunction to practice hospitality. And so the idea of hospitality, isn't it? It's inviting friends to my house, and stuff happens over a meal kind of thing. And I think in this day, as we think here in North America where we are today, and in our global world, I think the opportunities are increasing for doing this. We're inviting people, many, and then if we just think beyond our family, now it's to the nations who in our workplace where we live and so forth. So can you go down a track a little bit more of talking about ways that you're seeing around the world, people engaging with neighborhoods or the nations, or they're not making, they're not getting on an airplane, but they're engaging right where they live.
Yeah, and I think that's, but I think we have to just pause a little bit here and realize that to reach out with the gospel to people of our own ethnicity once we're saved is somewhat natural. We do it with our family, with our friends, but to do the same cross-culturally is not. And unless we are intentional and purposeful about that, it simply doesn't happen. So there can be a church in a community for generations, and unreached peoples might migrate and move in and set up their little community as well. But they can go generation after generation after generation and just not get touched, unless the church is intentional about reaching out. So I think there are definitely some cross-cultural skills we can learn, mindsets. The Kairos course helps to do that, and it helps to realize that, this is important, reaching out cross-culturally. And we also see, of course, in Acts 17, where Paul says, from one man, Adam, God made all and we would say people of the world, but Paul doesn't. He says all the nations, or the ethne of men. And it says, and he determined the times before appointed, and it goes on to say, and the exact places where they should live. So all this migration, the hand of God is there doing this. And of course he's upsetting us because he's rocking our comfort boat, and but we need to see this is God doing that, because from God's perspective, mission is the most important thing that's going on. God taking out of the nations of the world people for his name, as James says in Acts 15. So God's doing it. So why is God doing this? Yes, for mission, because Paul goes on to say that they might seek after him and find him. And so the reason why God's moving the nations around, of course, is for world mission. And we need to be mindful of that and have a bit of a change in our thinking, that mission is not just getting on an airplane, going to another country. I'll take Germany, for example. Over 2.5-3 million Muslim Turks and Kurds live inside Germany. And I was there a few years ago, and we were talking about this, doing some training with the church, and the pastor said, I have people in my church who work in factories, and they're rubbing shoulders with Muslim Turks and Kurds on a daily basis. So, that's it's interesting, and I think that's only going to increase. And so thinking missionaries, professionals going overseas, we need to start thinking, actually, we need to start developing a mindset where we can actually be involved in that first part of mission, which is reaching unreached peoples, right in our very communities. And so some of the great training that these agencies have, we need to start grabbing some of it and bring it into our churches, because this is a specialized area of ministry. It doesn't happen unless we're intentional and purposeful about it.
Yeah. And so that makes me think that one of the things you've developed under the umbrella of Simply Mobilizing is as a course that's about crossing cultures, and so that would be helping a person kind of move down that track. So help us here and our listener if we were thinking, okay, here's my local church, and I'm noticing suddenly that there's a lot of new immigrants that have moved into the neighborhood from a variety of places and trouble spots in the world, and others have moved here intentionally, not as refugees, but they've been able to get jobs and work here. What are the hurdles, just when we think of crossing cultures, then what would be some of the hurdles that I as a church leader or we as a group of people in our church need to be aware of in crossing to somebody from a different culture and being intentional about reaching out?
I think the biggest hurdle is fear, and often it's fear of the unknown. So we have one course, very easy, simple one, which is crossing cultures, and it's just trying to break that fear barrier. And so someone recently who did the course said, Max, before if I got on a bus or on a train and there was a Muslim, she was a lady, so a Muslim lady sitting in a seat, I would automatically go to the seat opposite. He said, now after doing crossing cultures, I would go and sit next to her and begin to engage with her in conversation. So I think those, little by little, chipping away at the things that are hindering us and stopping us from connecting. So I think fear is a big one.
Would be one, yeah. Are there some others?
Well, I think, is we have to be a learner of another culture. Friend of mine in New Zealand, this Sikh family just moved up a few doors up from where he was. So wanting to connect, he goes, knocks on the door and introduces himself, and then invites him and his family to his place next Friday night, 2 days away, for a meal. And so the man was very polite. He said, yes, thank you, and then so the wife cooked a beautiful meal, and Friday night came, they didn't turn up. And they waited and waited, and they didn't turn up. And then he didn't know what to do. He felt awkward then, and connecting with him. So I said, well, that's a very cultural thing for us to actually invite someone to our home for a meal. In other cultures, you just don't do that. If you're going to eat, you eat at your own home. But if you go to someone else's home, there's an occasion. What's the occasion? Is it a baby dedication, or is it a family celebration of some description? So there's often a reason, there's some event that they're being invited to. In the process of being at that event, they eat. But generally, if you're going to eat, you just eat in your own home. So sometimes that's the issue. Other times, like in the Philippines, we say things like, "Oh, come and visit us," we say things like that, and it's just a polite way of saying hi and how are you, and we're friends. But if you mean it, you always follow up with it. So I said to him, did you go and follow up on the invitation? He said, no, I just gave it once. I said, well, you probably, he was trying to work out, are you just being nice?
That's right.
So he needed to know that, no, you're serious about this, so you follow up on a couple of occasions. So he knows, okay, this is really on. And so cultures are different, and we can misinterpret. And so we need to be a learner of the culture, and agencies who have got some amazing stuff. And we're connecting, in fact, with a group in the UK that have got some amazing Friendship First course. And we're looking at adopting that into simply mobilizing and making that available too in our network. Yeah.
So, I mean, and some of that, again, it's the relational part. Someone who's moved from a different country, moved into our neck of the woods, they're very interested in learning about our culture. And it does give the opportunity to learn about theirs. I mean, there's a certain amount of the give and take there. But I think that's good what you said. I mean, the fear can keep me from even beginning. And so just the hello, or if it's having a meal together or a coffee along the way, that is a good starting point. I heard you one time talk about the church as an airport. What's that about?
So, yes, so there are many images, biblical images, that we associate the church with. Paul used the body, bride, temple, building. And there are possibly some contemporary images that we could also use, which would be very valid, such as a schoolhouse and place for learning, teaching, hospital, place for healing, gasoline station, place for refueling.
Yeah, that's right.
But how about, a terminal?
Yeah.
And the purpose of a terminal, whether it be an airport terminal, boat terminal, train terminal, all has the same function. It facilitates people on their journey to their desired destination. And so really that's that in the midst of, and including all these other beautiful images, I think this one ought to be included because that's what the local church is meant to be doing. So how can we facilitate God's people that are part of our church onto their on their journey of being on mission with God? And so terminals are great. You get excited, don't you, when you go to a terminal?
Yes.
And it's just exciting.
It's busy. There's a lot of activity.
Yeah, it's exciting.
And people have purpose.
Yeah, and you know where you're going.
Yeah.
But when the plane's delayed, instead of the terminal begins to lose its luster, and they're not meant for long term. So that's what can happen, I think, if a local church doesn't facilitate that journey. And I think every born-again believer has deep within their hearts this sense, this desire to be useful for God and to be fruitful. John 15, it's all about being fruitful. And so, when I was a pastor, we would often see people leave the church, and we would immediately label them as being rebellious, and maybe one or two were. But I think deep down, a lot of them were just frustrated because we weren't focused on their journey with God into fruitful service. We were more focused on them filling the pews in our church, and it was all about us as opposed to being about them and God and their fruitful service for God. So I think a lot of people do leave for that reason. They may not be able to articulate that reason, but I think deep down they're looking for something, searching. And when you find a Christian who has found their place and they're serving and they're being fruitful in ministry, they're the happiest Christians on the planet.
Yeah. So it's almost like, again, just in that kind of back to where we started, then the idea of there can be nurture and equipping, but if this third component of releasing doesn't happen, that would be the airport part, is we don't keep hanging around in the airport. I mean, we're there for as little time as we would like to be, but then you want to board that plane and be gone. So the releasing part really is you're moving into some destination.
So that's not the only image of a church. So they do come back. So we do have this sense of it being a body and sense of being a temple and that.
Yeah.
But it's like, you're in school and you go through the grades. You come to the end, and then it's graduation, isn't it? So, you're going out there in society and making a difference. But you'd be surprised if your headmaster would say to your parents, "Oh, look, we'd really like your son to actually come back because we've got a new course in grade 7, we'd like him to do it, I mean, the parent would go, "Look, I'm happy you've got a new course for grade 7.
Yeah.
Great, they're grade 6, they go up to grade 7, they can do it. But my son's not going back to do a new course. He's graduating." And so we sometimes do keep holding people back. And the whole idea is to release them and to find their place in ministry and fruitful service in God's kingdom.
Well, we've got maybe a couple of minutes left here. Just what would be any final thoughts then? Just we started with this idea and definition of missional church. It has these components and kind of honed in a little bit on the idea of release. Any other thoughts that kind of would wrap that up for us today?
I think, I often think back into the Old Testament where the people of God, they kept on having this fascination with the nations round about them. And they said, we want a king like they have a king and all this sort of stuff. And God would always say to them, "But you're different. You're my people. And if you would live for my glory and follow my precepts and my laws, you would be so transformed that the nations would want to be like you." But they kept on getting tripped up, and they wanted to be like the nations. And I think the church, to some degree, has done the same. We've looked at all the success stories out there, successful companies and people, and we've tried to model a little bit after them. And instead of having the church as an organism, a living body where every joint supplies, we've got a company, and the pastor can become someone like the CEO, and then so he gets this idea of what the church should do, the people should do, and then tries to get volunteers to do it. And I think that is so not the New Testament. It's so not the body of Christ. It's so not the New Testament church. The New Testament church is when God speaks to his people, and his people follow him. We as a church nurture, equip, so that they can then begin to follow the shepherd into fruitful ministry. So it's not, our vision really should be nurture, equipping, and releasing as a church. Yes, we can maybe collectively decide on some things, but I think that the main, the fundamental idea of a missional church, I think from a scriptural perspective, is the mobilization of God's people into mission with God. Not so much the organization, the church as an organization.
Okay. Thank you for that, and we'll put some of these notes on the show notes, as well as other video, and also some things of Max that continue to lead us through these things that we're thinking about here. So thank you, Max, for being with us at this podcast, and thank you for you as a listener for joining us. And if you need more information and things, you can find it on the globalvault.ca. But on our show notes that come with this podcast will be further details and stuff to read relating to mobilization and what we've been talking about here, the missional church. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Hi, this is Rahul, and I serve in the Silk Road. Thank you for checking out the Global Vault podcast. For more information on the Global Vault, including more episodes and resources, please visit our website at globalvault.ca. Ma'asalama, Yatik Alafia.